that should be plenty. Oh, great. And I also don't have a pen in my hand because I always get told off for clicking my pen. So it's good. I don't need a pen. I shouldn't have one. And welcome back to The Social Economist, perhaps Europe's most energetic social economy podcast. We're kicking off with our third and final mini-series of Season 3. We're going to be talking about energy, a topic of critical importance to Europe, for citizens, and for the social economy. Perhaps energy is a sector where the social economy actually has a competitive advantage, and business models that finally everyone, not just those already in the know, can get their heads around. In this season, Enna from European Commission, Energy, for those not in the know, and Impact Scale-up from The Hague, working on decommissioning and geothermal power, and finally with ResCoop, European Network for Energy Cooperatives and Communities. Welcome to this second episode of our final mini-series of Season 3. In this episode, we're going to be speaking with Marc Nijmeijer from WellDecommissioned, an impact scale-up working in the energy transition in The Hague. Marc has been working with WellDecommissioned for 10 years. He's founded the company 10 years ago, I should actually say. They work on decommissioning of oil and gas, but also on geothermal energy. So they're really in the heart of the energy transition. I have to admit, I fell in love a little bit with the company WellDecommissioned because the name is actually a pun. If you can think of oil wells, well decommissioned, I think that's very clever. And it's not then only me looking for puns in the social economy. So people who've been listening to this podcast for a while will know I do love a pun when it comes to a title. It was really great to speak with Marc. He's actually a neighbour in our building in The Hague. So I'm really happy to bring this conversation to you now to hear his perspective on the impact economy and the energy transition.
My name is Marc Nijmeijer, and I'm the founder of WellDecommissioned. A little bit about myself. I've worked as an entrepreneur since 2017, starting this company where I'll talk a bit further about, obviously. But before I started as an entrepreneur, I've been working in corporates for about 20 years. In banking and in the energy sector. I decided to start as an entrepreneur when I was 42, to give a bit of perspective. So I'm 52 now. That gives me, a bit of a runway that I've had on starting up a company, and that is WellDecommissioned. WellDecommissioned is really about how do we clean up and decommission the legacy of oil and gas, of our industry worldwide. The reason why I started the company was from the insights that I've had working in the energy sector in oil and gas before. If you think about it, take a step back, there's 2 million wells on our planet that need closure. They've been drilled everywhere in the US, obviously here on the North Sea in Europe, but think about Russia, many companies in Africa up to Australia. So we've drilled holes across our planet, and it's given immense value for our society and development in, call it, the past century or so. However, there's also, at the end of field life of many oil and gas fields, the obligation that the companies have and we as society to make sure we clean up those assets again. And that's where WellDecommissioned was actually founded for, to provide data and insights to make those projects more affordable and expedited.
What does it really look like as somebody working in this industry, the energy industry? Maybe to share a little bit about what day-to-day actually is it like as a startup in this sector? Because I think probably people have very different ideas than it actually is.
We're a company, like I would say, like anyone other, a startup or scale-up company like we are basically we're 8 people. And that means some of our team is actually the software developers that write the software, so to say. We have analysts that are working with data and our clients to bridge, let's say, the use of clients of our software, but also to understand the relationships in the data and develop algorithms, machine learning algorithms, AI, to mine data, structure data, and create better insights. And then adds me with one more colleague to actually develop the business, sell the software, so to say. The focus that we have is impact making. How can we actually create a positive impact with our tool to have expedited cleanups, to help, in this case, geothermal energy transition projects to be more affordable and therefore expedite also the development of this business.
Can you use the data also then to measure your impact as a company?
Data and software typically is an enabler in the process of companies being more successful. Now, how do you measure outcomes is always with improvements. It's an industry where, especially here in the North Sea, companies are retracting. They're moving away, shedding jobs. There is less and less people that have expertise on this topic. These people that remain have very busy jobs, a lot of pressure to deliver. That means, these are projects where platform wells and subsea wells on the North Sea, so some subsea wells are on the bottom of the sea, were closed permanently, and the software helps them to actually be informed in a straightforward and a quick manner. So actually it allows them to spend time on, for instance, organizing the project instead of trying to figure out how long things take and what are the key tasks to be performed, because the software helps them for that. So that was some very good data points on feedback we got from our software. One of our clients had a very successful project, the last project we had here over summer, and that showed clearly that the software really works because they went through full cycle. And they also saved a lot of money when they did the work. So it allows them to clean up a few more wells in the future.
It's sometimes difficult to understand how software helps with this process. And because I think when most people think about decommissioning or geothermal, it's quite hands-on, I would say, heavy work. How does software actually help with this transition?
Well, I think it's important to realize, if we think about the importance of software and structured planning and structured learning, which this software actually does for us, that heavy capital projects, whether it be oil and gas or geothermal projects, or for instance, building a large apartment tower here at the other side of the street. It takes planning. Think about, when the architect makes a drawing together with the investor and the other stakeholders. That's when you really want to understand the business case and determine what it should be costing. If you want to save costs or optimize, you're going to do it with the architecture, not when you're building the building or you're halfway and go to the contractor and say, hey, can you add another layer on top or take one off? It's probably going to cost that it costs more. And this generally is the case for any heavy capital project. So the philosophy is that if you're early, you can actually optimize these decisions and be smarter and make it more affordable.
That makes a lot of sense.
So software is a great tool, I would say, for many purposes, but for especially such a concept stage where you want to understand the impact and relationship when there's many parameters involved. And especially when in oil and gas, often wells are in the ground, a couple of kilometers deep. So what's the impact if you do things differently? We can calculate, relate to previous projects, use data from there. So that's why software is an important tool, but it also allows you to collect data, obviously, in the course of a project and follow through. So our software gets used also during the construction or deconstruction in case of decommissioning and in the evaluation stage.
maybe to explain a bit what you mean by geothermal energy as well, because I think it's not necessarily something everybody knows about or understands. And I think there's also been discussions about whether it was helping to make things the ground more unstable or not. I don't know if I'm just curious if you want to say that.
There's different applications, different parts of the world where you can generate energy from the heat of the earth. That's where geothermal is about. Now, if you think about, for instance, Italy or Indonesia, Philippines, if you drill a well after a couple of 100 meters, for sure you will get hot steam, or you will get a heat of a couple of 100 degrees Celsius, and be able to generate with water steam, put that steam into a generator and have electricity. And that is a conventional way in some of these countries to produce electricity. Now, here in the Netherlands, we're a bit less fortunate that if we drill a couple of 100 meters, we don't get a couple of 100 Celsius temperature. But if we drill, let's say, around 2 kilometers deep, then we get hot water of so typically around 80 degrees, maybe a bit warmer. And that is very good for light industrial, agricultural usage, especially in the greenhouses. Heating, it's used already a lot, but also for city heating. You have to, of course, use a heat exchanger once you've gotten that hot water out, get it onto a heating grid for cities. Now, one of the challenges we have in the Netherlands is that there's not a lot of heating grids, and The Hague has a heating grid for a small part of the city, I would say, and has 2 geothermal wells. They were already drilled back in, I think, 2011 or 2012. So that costed quite a few bucks to drill those wells, as you might now understand. But because at that time, there was no offset or grid at the time available for the heat of those wells. Basically, that government geothermal company went bust, and now that was revamped, and now it's running since a couple of years. It shows how difficult, let's say, the business case or dealing with the integrated solution of getting the heat to houses, how difficult that is.
Yeah, no, interesting. I mean, it shows that you need the government, or I guess, involved to provide or help with the infrastructure.
And so at present there is bigger plans for The Hague to actually use geothermal heating to heat parts of the city where there need to be, of course, grids in place, and there need to be sources for heating. The wells can be an important source for geothermal heating. And it's not just The Hague. There's also other places in the Netherlands, but actually from the subsurface perspective of drilling, The Hague is actually, I would say, a pretty okay place to be, although we don't get volcanic heat like in the Philippines.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, it doesn't look like there's much volcanic heat outside from the window today, but yeah, it's super interesting. I think geothermal is one of those energy sources which, well, I don't want to say that you don't see it because obviously it's underground, but whereas people talk about wind and tidal and things, they don't really talk so much about geothermal because I think it's something you individually can't comprehend so well.
Yeah, and it's also in the energy mix. If you look at the International Energy Agency statistics, you have to search really to find it. It is also a small part of the mix, and it needs. From renewables perspective, wind and especially solar are a lot bigger than geothermal. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be developing geothermal projects. So if the circumstances are right, they can be great added value, because we also see the limitations of solar and wind.
Especially in the Netherlands, where the sun doesn't shine.
Like today.
Yeah. One question which comes to my mind now is, you mentioned sort of companies retracting, job losses. Is this something which you also see in your work, that there's actually, you would maybe expect there's more activity in some way in the North Sea, or with the kind of pushback at the moment against the green transition, energy transition? Is it something you see happening, that there's more activity around drilling new wells,
oil and gas?
Well, we certainly see this dynamic in many ways. If I look back at the last 3 years, we've had quite some events. We've had the Ukraine war and the impact to energy prices that we've had. We've had, let's say, presidency change in the US. That has also impacted the global view, but also within the EU. There have been, different voices coming up, so to say, in terms of climate. And all of these affected our clients. So think about oil companies, but also about geothermal companies. And these, I call it oil companies, but, there's not a lot of oil companies that still call themselves oil companies. They talk about being energy companies, and fair enough. It could, on the North Sea, be about CO2 storage. It could be about investments in renewables. If we think about companies like Equinor, and their Total Energies, for instance, they have quite a bit of investments in wind parks as well. And for one that has followed the news, we can see that this is not a straight line in increasing investments and activities, but it's more like a wave type of a movement where the investment and activity levels go up and down. And we see that if I look through that decommissioning and the cleanup required in a mature basin, an oil and gas basin of the North Sea, will be increasing, because in the Netherlands, the south of the UK, a lot of oil and gas is gone, and we simply need to close all these wells and move out of the way these platforms, because we'll need this North Sea for other purposes, potentially wind parks, but it's also, I would say, good housekeeping not to leave rusting structures in place where which may cause accidents.
And that also then brings me on to the next topic, which is about sort of public policy and working with public authorities. And I think you work a bit with the city of The Hague, and also with EU funding as well. So how's that experience been on one hand, and also what is it that you're doing with these different public authorities?
Yeah, so yes, and we've also worked with institutes in the UK, which has public, let's say, authorities involvement. But maybe to start with the involvement we've had from the municipality of The Hague, is that we've been, let's say, in one of the startup centers here in Apollo offices since 2018. I started up WellDecommissioned being very focused on making sure that we had a commercially viable product, and that made me focus really on not focusing on, let's say, the public domain, but on the industrial companies, getting their feedback on would there be a value to them of having this product. That's it. And doing that for a couple of years and having good traction, the focus was then on, that's great, how can we then actually invest further in this and make this a wider platform for society, like developing in geothermal industry as well. And we want to move on to develop our software further for other segments, including offshore wind, for instance, and CO2 storage. Now, if you think about that, that takes a lot of investment for a small company, so to say. And then we kind of bumped into the opportunity to pitch this for some government funding programs around geothermal heat, for instance. We had some initial funding from the municipality of The Hague to show that our software works, create a viable demo, and test it with a geothermal company. And that was actually a very positive project where we also got very good feedback from the geothermal segment. And I said, hey, that's great. So very grateful for what the municipality did there with us. but it also helped us to actually understand the impact in the energy transition zone, so to say, from our software, which actually got us to renew our business plan. And this was picked up where we had, with the current focus that we have, we've spoken a lot about decommissioning, but the current focus that we have on a day-to-day basis, more than half of our business is on geothermal and innovation. And that means that that fitted actually really well with the EU program as well for the energy transition. And we had a funding a couple of years ago, a long-term funding to invest further in our software with the Consent for West program here in the Netherlands. And really grateful for that, because it actually allows us to do a lot of data science research with our people, but also to invest in our software and create some really good perks that help energy transition projects.
Interesting. And actually, how related then? So I imagine wind to be quite different from geothermal. And how difficult is it to adapt the software from one energy source to another?
Our software is very sophisticated, and I think this one of the aspects is that it has a very sophisticated taxonomy, and it relates to data sets, industrial data sets, and using them and providing these inputs along lines that engineers can understand output of the software. Changing market segments does make a difference, but we've done a lot of work already, and changing the software is not that difficult. It is much more getting the change in mindset and the market acceptance for tools that are, in that sense, pretty disruptive, where planners typically have been working with their own spreadsheets and experience and on a deterministic basis, where this software actually has been proven to be a lot more objective and very accurate. But it's not a black box, I would say, but it's a tool that's, let's say, in one end, takes away some work from people, gives them some relief to do other valuable work, but it just changes the day-to-day job. And, it needs to take some appreciation. If you need to learn something new to do and get it on board. And I guess for any human, that's a change process. And that takes the longest time.
How are you feeling then for the future of this energy transition? Are you feeling optimistic with what you've been doing and where it's going? Or how are you seeing the future?
I'm an optimist.
Okay, that's good.
There has been a bold agenda on the energy transition, also in the EU. And I think that is really good that we've made those steps. And I think, of course, we also see now a slightly different dynamic, not only within the EU, but also in other countries across the world where things tend to slow down a bit compared to the ambition level that we've had. I believe that the energy transition is not, it's there, it's not going away. And this is also back to the question to people, us, on how badly do we want this and how fast. So the fact that governments may not be always too eager or pushy is for us as people maybe also a moment where realism drips in and say, hey, we can't always look at the government for some of this. Let's take our own decisions. We're realizing that we can't influence or change everything ourselves. But we can't look for everything to the government either. So I think governments will come back at some point. I also think that people will need to reflect on, what's the benefits actually I'm getting if I use electricity to drive a car, or to, if I I use geothermal energy to heat my home. And even if that would be a bit more expensive, what if we have cleaner air and if we have, less climate effects from what we do? Maybe that's something that gives me at least a better feeling, or make a contribution to society there. I think that is something where people are more open to than when government enforces stuff on them, at least for a large part of our population. But I think at some point railroads were not built by the people, they were developed by governments. So at some point we need to go back and look again at the level of ambitions. Are EU and governments ambitious enough to actually move ahead? Because we also see that here in the Netherlands, but I think that's the case in many European countries, government investments are prohibiting electricity usage for industry or business purposes already to a great extent. And that means, energy transition investments lagging is becoming a big issue. It may not be the reflection of the people, of why energy transition investments are so important, but for sure this is a main point where it shows we cannot ignore the fact that we're transitioning.
No, it's a reality, whether you like it or not. Also, there's the demand for electricity, and it's just exponential. So it's interesting to reflect on. There's a lot more to be done, obviously. And I think when you were talking earlier about the fact that if you could make it actually as a business case behind it, then it's not just about cost; it's also about value. And I think that's interesting. And of course, if that narrative can get out there, that might make a difference.
Well, and I strongly believe in that. So what we want to contribute to and are committed to, how can we make sure that geothermal heating gets more affordable by making the projects conducted with our software more successful and having less failure cost. Drilling wells involves success and no success outcomes. An unsuccessful outcome may cost, depending on the project and the drill, 5 million, 10 million. These are heavy industry projects. For 10 million, we could have drilled a new well. So the less failures, the more money is available for clean energy. And if you think about that, clean heat helps us to heat cities, but also make sure we don't all need a electric heating pump. So it gives a relief to our electric network at the same point as well. So really important, and the government and some of the leading companies in the Netherlands, they are very much raising this point. And I do believe that this is part of making the energy transition successful. It's not just looking at one solution. We need to have all the solutions being developed. There needs to be some business case there, obviously, as well. But there's huge learning curves that need to be exploited. If we think about, the petrol cars they've had learning curves for more than 100 years. You see how efficient it's gotten. We want to move on, but at the same time, we can't appreciate that geothermal or driving electric has immediately achieved that learning curve. So for batteries, etc., there is still a huge step to be made. There's maybe a recommendation to be very astute on lobbies or interests that are coming across, whether it's from the tobacco industries or the car industries or oil and gas industries, to keep a long-term focus. And I know that's, for all kind of reasons, electoral or other reasons, to save jobs in industries, that, for instance, on, the car and the petrol car versus electric car type of discussion, I think it's just one example on how difficult these decisions are. I can understand why people in the short term say, hey, let's push a bit on the brake and let's not go that fast and stick to petrol. I think there's a very big risk for EU showing up that our industry may be becoming in the longer term irrelevant or overtaken, so to say, in automotive terms by countries like China, where these dynamics are not playing out. And I think that is probably the biggest risk for our automotive industry, that in maybe 5 or 10 years down the road already, European cars are either too complex or, the focus has not been on renewing and the energy transition. That element, which is often difficult to let's say, capture in the parliamentary discussions when elections come up, for instance, is, I think, something to take very close to heart, because it's also the policymakers' responsibility, so to say, to translate that message back to our politicians. And I sometimes wonder if that voice is loud enough.
No, indeed. And I guess the message is that they shouldn't be giving up on the green transition, which it feels a bit sometimes like they are.
Well, I think it's indeed not giving up. It's also the fact that, that is where in the longer term, the business case of our society is. And if you think about creating export products, that's one of the things that China got right. And they don't have that big legacy in oil and gas or in producing cars, so to say, or maybe I should say in terms of, fuel-driven engines.
Yeah.
If you think about, the analogy of, the electric trains replacing steam trains, there have been a lot of companies in the past betting on that they were building the best steam train.
Last time I checked, the Eurostar is electric, so
yeah. And still going. You have a few in the UK. You have a few steam trains.
Oh yeah, or diesel, but it's most of it's electrified. It's one of those topics where there's a discussion around competitiveness and autonomy and resilience, and then at the same time there's a pushback against green transition and energy transition, which seems very contradictory, because actually the energy transition is all about being competitive, being resilient, but there doesn't seem to be a big connection in Europe between those two agendas by some policymakers.
Yeah, and I think this is something, if we, we really need to elevate from this topic to probably properly see it, is that, this is of strategic importance of nations and of the EU to actually be, in a winning position industrially in the future. So the fact that we try to keep that petrol engine running for a while longer, I think is just a burden in terms of moving on.
I'm trying to think if there's any other things that I haven't asked you, but my last question is a standard question, which is whether or not you have a podcast you'd like to recommend. It doesn't have to be about the energy transition, but can also be.
I'm not really a structured podcast listener, but there's a few that I've used in the past. One is to use more sales and business development insights and get a bit of reflections there. But also the International Energy Agency has quite some good podcasts to actually explain the developments and some of the complexities around our energy transition. Yet the one I really like is not so much only a podcast, but it's the New York Times, where I have a subscription on, and that has a reading version, but also it then spills over into tapping into podcasts, actual podcasts on the news. And since we have such a lot of worldwide impact also on what's happening in America, that really, if I have a bit of time, is my read in terms of the podcast.
Of course, no episode would be complete without a recommendation from me as well as our guest of a podcast, which you can also be checking out. I'm going to recommend Trump 100. It's a really nice podcast which brings a lot of information about what's going on in the US, which, as we know, is a bit unpredictable at the moment. It's called Trump 100. It was supposed to be only for the first 100 days of the second Trump presidency. Those people who are following this more closely will realize we're well past 100, but they keep going, so that's really nice. It's a daily podcast, weekday podcast about Trump and his White House, so do check it out. It was really fantastic to speak with Marc. I think it's super interesting, the work that is being done by WellDecommissioned, and also in this sort of broad range of energy methods of production. So it's really been fantastic to hear it more about what they're doing upstairs at WellDecommissioned. Join us next time for our final episode of Season 3, where we'll be speaking with Chris Vretos from ResCoop, the European Network for Energy Cooperatives and Communities. This is going to be the final episode of our series, so make sure to join it and listen. Thanks very much to the European Commission, as always, for making this podcast possible, and to our producer, Jan Kishevara. Until next time, goodbye.